Good morning, sir. We are the Group 8, and today we are excited to present our topic about consciousness. So, first, what is consciousness? So, consciousness refers to our awareness of ourselves and the world around us. It encompasses our thoughts, perceptions, emotions, memories, and the sense of being awake and aware. Essentially, it's a state of being conscious or having an active awareness, which allows us to process information, make decisions, and reflect on our experiences. So there are two important distinctions of consciousness. First is the conscious content, and second is the conscious level. Conscious content refers to what we are aware of at a given moment. This involves self-awareness and perception. So for example, what you think and what you feel at the moment. So kintahay, you and your friends are planning to watch a movie. So while planning, you felt excited. So that is an example of how aware you are at that moment. And for the conscious level, this refers to how awake we are. So for example, a student is sitting quietly and staring blankly during a class. So the teacher thinks maybe the student is daydreaming and not listening to her. So when she asked a question, the student answered correctly. This shows that the student is at a high conscious level, awake and aware, even if they don't look very active. Multidimensional nature of consciousness. Consciousness isn't just one-dimensional, not just more or less conscious. Bain et al. 2016 suggested two key dimensions: the range of conscious contents and functions of consciousness. Range of conscious contents is how much and what we can be aware of, while functions of consciousness is what consciousness allows us to do, like what to control attention or choosing actions. In assessing consciousness is a form of consciousness where its contents are available for use by processes such as attention and memory. And in phenomenal consciousness is a direct conscious experience, a C-axis consciousness. So in understanding consciousness versus unconscious processes, it has a controversy. There's a debate over the usefulness and flexibility of unconscious processes. In Freud's view, Freud believed unconscious processes had massive power. So these claims unconscious processes can perform all high-level cognitive functions of consciousness, suggest that this could lessen the importance of consciousness. So, with the criticisms of Hassin's principle, methodological issues, it's hard to prove effective, were solely due to unconscious process. Contradictory findings. Other studies, example like Hesselman and Morse in 2015, shows limits of unconscious functions. And in social communication, as a key function of consciousness is to support social interaction. Humans as social beings need to predict, understand, and influence other behavior. Understanding consciousness versus unconscious processes. There's a debate over the usefulness and flexibility of unconscious processes. In Freud's view, Freud believed unconscious processes had a massive power. Evidence of unconscious processing occurs in perception, learning, memory, and possibly decision-making, the yes it can principle. This claims unconscious processes can perform all high-level cognitive functions of consciousness. Example, reasoning, goal pursuit, and cognitive control. Suggest this could lessen the importance of consciousness. But with the criticisms of Hassin's principle, methodological issues, it's hard to prove effects were solely due to unconscious processes. Contradictory findings. Other studies, example, Hesselman and Morse 2015, shows limits of unconscious functions. So in social communication, A key function of consciousness is to support social interaction. Humans, as social beings, need to predict, understand, and influence other behaviors. For the next slides, will be discussed by Jovan and Gilmore.
Hi everyone, it's me Ken Agatan, and for this day we're going to talk about consciousness in brain damage patients. So, brain injuries can significantly impact consciousness, leading to a range of disorders from brief confusions to prolonged states of unconsciousness. So, there are three stages of degraded consciousness in brain damage patients. First, as we have coma, next, vegetative state, and lastly, minimally conscious state. So, what is coma? Coma is considered to have no conscious awareness and no wakefulness. So, those that we see in ICU in the hospitals, lucky for those who wake up from coma, if you'll ask them, they won't remember anything that happened to them within the time frame that they were in a coma or in a state of coma. Why? Because obviously there's no conscious awareness and no wakefulness. Next, we have vegetative state. So patients in this state appear to be awake but show no external evidence of wakefulness or awareness. Lastly is minimally conscious state, so involving wakefulness and some evidence of consciousness. Alright, next is the neural correlates of consciousness. This approach typically involves relating behavioral measures of conscious awareness to associated patterns of brain activity. So this approach has two advantages. First is that it is theoretically important to compare behavioral and neuroimaging measures to identify their similarities and differences. So, why is it important? Para dili ka bias. So, like, you look into both aspects of the behavior and the neuroimaging measures. So, it is as well to prove your conclusion or diagnosis. Next is that neuroimaging measures may assess consciousness more directly than behavioral measures if uncontaminated by additional processes such as attention and memory. Okay, so now let's talk about feed-forward processing and recurrent processing. So in psychology and neuroscience, feed-forward processing and recurrent processing represent distinct phases of information processing or information processing in the brain, often associated with consciousness. So to elaborate more, talking about feed-forward processing is that it is the initial, fast, and unconscious stage of information processing. It starts with sensory input, so we have auditory or visual, and rapidly sweeps through the brain, activating various areas. So this processing is considered unconscious because it doesn't involve attention or conscious awareness. So it can lead to unconscious priming. So we all know that priming is under the implicit memory, and then or habituation, but not necessarily conscious experience. While recurrent processing, on the other hand, it involves the feedback of information back to earlier stages of processing. So, recurrent processing allows the brain to refine and integrate information, leading to more complex and conscious experiences. So, to compare and contrast feed-forward processing and recurrent processing, if you talk about feed-forward processing, is like it is the input or the sensory, it's the information processing that starts with sensory input and not necessarily includes conscious awareness or attention. However, if we talk about recurrent processing, it refers to or it involves the feedback of information. So again, feed forward processing is the input, while recurrent processing is the feedback. That is why in recurrent processing, it allows the brain to refine and integrate information. So we have some examples here about or regarding feed forward and recurrent. So first example is visual perception. So when you see an object, the initial feed forward sweep quickly processes features like colors, edges, and shapes. However, tungod kay or need ka consciously aware, we have the recurrent processing. So the recurrent processing is needed to integrate these features and focus attention. Another example, so we have auditory perception. So similarly, hearing a sound involves an initial feed-forward sweep to process the auditory input. And then with the recurrent processing, it allows for the conscious experience of understanding the sound, its meaning, and its source. So, in summary, feed-forward processing is the input or the initial rapid unconscious sweep of information, while recurrent processing involves feedback and looping and is thought to be essential for conscious awareness and higher order cognitive function. Okay, so next we're gonna talk about backward masking. So what is backward masking? It is a cognitive phenomenon where the perception of a stimuli or a stimulus is suppressed by a subsequent stimulus presented immediately after. So we have, for example, we have two examples here about the visual backward masking and the auditory backward masking. So for visual backward masking, for example, is that a researcher flashes a grid on a screen for a few milliseconds. So take note, a few milliseconds only. Followed immediately by a pattern of random lines, the viewer might not consciously report seeing the grid, but their unconscious brain might process it. So another example is the auditory backward masking. So a faint sound is presented, followed immediately by a louder sound. The faint sound might become inaudible because of the subsequent louder sound. So tugod kay, yeah, if atong una is like obviously kay faint sound raman siya. So if matabunan gid og louder sound or mas kusog nga kuan sound, obviously ang ato ma-perceive is that or ato kuan is matabunan gyud ang faint sound tungod kay obviously ang nikuan niya is ang isapaw is mas kusog nga sound. So those are the examples for backward masking. So in sum, conscious visual perception is typically associated with the occurrence of recurrent processing, whereas feed-forward processing without recurrent processing generally does not lead to conscious perception. However, simple visual discrimination, like for example animal versus non-animal, can occur without recurrent processing. And recurrent processing of an attended stimuli is not always associated with conscious experience. Thus, there is not a direct one-to-one relationship between conscious awareness and recurrent processing. So that is all for the topic consciousness in brain damaged patients. Thank you.
So, good day everyone. Today I'm going to discuss about the global workspace. So, the global workspace is a theoretical model that explains in how we became conscious of information. It acts as a mental stage where important information is broadcast to different brain systems. It was developed by Bernard Baars and was later expanded by Stanislas Dehaene with the global neuronal workspace theory. So, the global workspace is a model that explains on how we became conscious of informations. Kani is ang ato ang mental stage atong utok kung asa ang mga important information gani kay i-broadcast sa different parts sa atong brain. So, moving on. We have the key features of the global workspace theory. So the first one is the selective accessing. So selective access is a small amount of information can enter the workspace at a time. With the use of attention, it helps select what's get in. So selective accessing only a small amount of information can enter in the workspace at a time. Mao nga kani bitong limitado ang ma-process ato ang conscious state. With the help of attention, it filter out the brain kung unsa jud dapat ang angay nato nga i-store or angay nga i-focus bitaw. Example na kay like nag-study ka sa library. Like ako, nag-study ko sa library. Tas during finals ni, then banha na bitaw kayong palibot. Nga na kani uban nagtabi, nag-discuss. Then ako, mas gipili jud sa akong brain nga mag-focus na sa ako ang gibasa para makatuon ko. Mo na siya gitawag nga selective accessing. So, moving on, we have the broadcasting. So, once in the workspace, the information is shared with the other parts of the brain. This makes it conscious and usable for tasks like thinking and decision making. So, once nga ang information nga is makasud na sa to ang workspace, gi-share na siya sa katong kuan, diba? Gi-share na siya sa different parts sa to ang brain. Then tungod ana ang kana nga mga information mahimo na siyang conscious, dayon magamit na nato na siya for like kuan kaning maghuna-huna ka or like kaning mga decision making gani ingana gani. Then ang example ana kay kadtong pag midterm na to, di ba nagpa kaning quiz si sir, tas ug unsay nanggawa sa quiz mao say nanggawa sa midterm nga exam. Dayon pagkabasa nako sa test questionnaire, sa ang akong utok kay like ni function dayon ni share siya sa different parts sa ako ang brain. Dayon nakahuna-huna kung unsay ako mga answer to unsa nga mga letters. Mo na siya use sa broadcasting. So we also have the integration. So it combines input from senses, memory, and reasoning as well. So we also have the integration. So it combines input from senses, memory, as well as reasoning into one unified experience. So the global workspace combines the input gikan sa senses. So ato ang memory, kaning reasoning, kuan, para mahimong isa ka experience na jud siya ba. Mura siya kaning gisumpay-sumpay bitaw tanang panghitabo, tanang na feel, na huna-hunaan, na dungog, kuan nimo para gani commercial maka-construct siya o kaning klaro nga panghitabo gani or klaro nga kuan ba experience nga na. Example na kay kaning nakadungog bitaw ko music unya, nakahinumdum ko sa memory na ba nga nasabtan nako ang feeling ana nga wala nga ingana pud mi gana ba. Mo na siya integration. So we have the real world analogy. As you can see, they have naay duha ka pictures. Mo na siya ang real world analogy nako for the global workspace. Hey, sige. So, example number 1 is, as you can see, no, naay theater, na mga tao, na ang spotlight. So, imagine as the stage as the global workspace. Dayon, ang mga actors on the stage, mao ang information. Tapos kakita mo ng backstage or kaning mga audience, mo na siya ang gitawag na unconscious nga giprocess. Mo na nakakita mo gamay ra jud ang naa sa stage. Only few actors can be on the stage at once, di ba? Kay ang global workspace kay pilion na jud ba ug asa importante. Unya ang spotlight nakatungod siya sa attention. Mo na siya ga-determine unsay angay makita. same jud sa global workspace nga silbi ba gi-focus ra, gi-filter out sa attention no unsay angay mosud sa ato ang brain. So we also have the news anchor analogy. So ang reporters mao na siya ang unconscious systems. Kani bang reporters diri sa ubos ba may kaning nagsend og nagsend og information sa ato ang brain. Dayon ang news anchor mao ang global workspace that selects the key information which should be bitaw brought out to public unsay angay ipadungog. Then ang broadcast ang nag-broadcast to viewers mao na siya ang info shared with the whole brain. Only the stories that the anchor shares known to the public, just like only selected info reaches to your brain conscious. So diri jud ba gipakita like gipakita og unsa ra jud angay bag unsay gipili mo ra jud angay mahinumduman or angay nato nga ma-focus. So moving on, the importance of cognitive psychology in global workspace. So this explains in how we focus attention becomes aware and control behavior. It helps us understand phenomena like why we don't notice everything we see. So the inattentional blindness. So a small recap of what is inattentional blindness is. So inattentional blindness happens when we fail to notice something in plain sight because our attentions was focused somewhere else. Ang example na kay kadto ganing real world analogy po ni katong ako si Jael tas nasuko si Ken mo namin may dapit sa library pero nakoy kasturya at that time tas na space na mong duha ni Jael unya nilabay ko na si Ken na nga paspas ko yung kuno kayo lakaw tas wala ko nakabantay ba tas nangita ko ni Ken ko nga day asa si Ken mutunan si Jael nga ha nilabay naman sa tong atubangan mo na siya gitawag nga inattentional blindness. So moving on, how conscious thoughts becomes conscious and why working memory is so limited. So moving on, how conscious thoughts become conscious. So in our mind, it constantly processes informations in the background. So such as memories, sensations, and habit. When something becomes relevant, it focuses on it, like recalling or forgetting a name. It enters to the global workspace, and we became consciously aware of. So, another one is why working memory is so limited. So, why working memory is so limited? Working memory can only hold few items at time because of the global workspace has a limited capacity like a small mental mental stage. So only a handful of mental actors can be in the spotlight at once, which why we can't think of or remember too many things simultaneously. So like for kato dyan ako ang gi-explain bitaw sa real world analogy katong theater bitaw nga gamay ra jud ba ang ma-focus sa tuang workspace mahatagan bitaw siya attention gamay ra kay di siya pwede dinaghan agkato ra jud mga importante. So to sum it up, the global workspace is the brain's central stage for conscious processing. It filters, selects, and broadcasts important informations. It also allows us to think, reason, and make decision-making what we aware of. And lastly, it is a crucial concept in both cognitive psychology and neuroscience for the global workspace. So, Ms. Sarachi will be the one to differentiate and further explains the neuronal workspace theory.
Good day, everyone. Today, I'll be explaining the global neural workspace. So, this theory was proposed by two scientists, Stanislas Dehaene and Gian-Pierre Chandra. So, GNW suggests that consciousness happens when information is broadcast widely across a large neural network in our brain. So, it specifically involves the frontal and parietal regions of the brain. To make it simple, image information as a message being announced over a loudspeaker that the whole brain can hear. That's when we become conscious of it. Now let's talk about the key concept of the GNW theory. The first one is global access. Conscious content can be accessed by memory, attention, language, and other systems. Neural ignition, it is a sudden, large-scale activation of neurons, like lights flashing on together. Attention role is it acts like a filter. It selects which information becomes conscious. And the last one is unconscious competition. Before information reaches consciousness, many mental processes are silently competing. For example, imagine you're in a noisy room. You don't notice every conversation, but when someone says your name, your brain's attention filter picks it up, and you instantly become aware of it. Another theory is the local recurrency theory, or LRT. This theory says that consciousness arises from local feedback loops inside specific parts of the brain, especially in sensory areas like the visual cortex. Instead of a one-way flow from our senses to the brain, there's a back and forth communication happening locally. For example, sometimes you might quickly glimpse an image but not be able to describe it. You still felt like you saw something. That's local recurrent processing at work. LRT highlights that consciousness can happen even without being able to report it right away. The next theory is Integrated Information Theory, or IIT, by Julio Tononi. IIT is a theory that tries to answer the question, what makes something conscious? According to IIT, consciousness happens when a system connects information together in a very complex and unified way. It's not just having lots of information, it's about how the pieces of information are linked together. Now for the main ideas of IIT. The first one is integration. The brain doesn't just collect random bits of information, it combines them into one experience. For example, when you look at a dog, you don't see color, shape, and movements separately. You experience one complete dog running toward you. Your brain merges all those senses into one moment. Second one is differentiation. Even though information is integrated, your brain can tell apart different experiences. Like, seeing a dog and hearing a car horn feel different. Your consciousness can separate one experience from another. In IIT, the degree of consciousness is measured by a value called phi. The higher the phi, the higher the consciousness. Simple rule. A simple machine like a light switch has low or zero phi because it doesn't combine information. It's just about what? On and off. A human brain has a very high phi because it mixes millions of sensations, memories, and emotions into single experience. For a quick analogy to remember IIT, think of a consciousness like a cake. Flour, eggs, and sugar are separate ingredients. Those are raw information. When you mix them together into one cake, that is integration. You can't easily separate them anymore. The better mixed the cake is, the more whole it becomes, just like consciousness. The next one is Higher Order Thought Theory, or HOT, by David Rosenthal. HOT says you're conscious of something only when you are aware that you are thinking about it. It's about thinking about your own thoughts. Breaking it down even easier, your brain has first order thoughts. Basic experience like seeing an apple or hearing a song. But to be conscious, you need a higher order thought. That is a thought about that first thought. In other words, you realize you are seeing the apple or hearing the song. Simple example, you see a red apple. First thought is a red apple. Automatic experience. The higher order thought is I am seeing a red apple. That is self-awareness. So if you don't have that second layer thought, the awareness, HOT says you're not truly conscious of the apple yet. Next is the recurrent processing theory, or RPT. Also Victor Lamb. RPT is closely related to LRT but focuses more generally on the idea about recurrent or feedback connections anywhere in the brain. RPT says conscious happens when information inside the brain starts going back and forth, not just moving forward. In other words, when the brain loops information between neurons, instead of just passing it one way, that's when we become conscious. Breaking it down very simply, normally information flows forward, from your eyes to your brain like a one-way street. But recurrent processing means sending information back and forth, feedback between neurons. This back and forth inside sensory areas like the visual cortex helps create conscious experience. Another simple example, you see a ball. Your brain doesn't just process the image once. It sends the information forward and then loops it back to recheck and refine the experience. This looping activity helps create the feeling, oh, I am seeing a ball. Now the key points about RPT, conscious happens early, right when sensory information is processed. It does not need attention or decision making to happen first. It is about the raw experience before you even think about it. I'll give you a very easy analogy. So think about a roundabout traffic circle instead of a straight road. Kung mo ano sa Cebu, there's, also in Tagbilaran, no? Padong sa cathedral, there's a roundabout. So, example, the cars, bao-baos or motor, are the information. They don't just drive straight through. They circle around creating interaction. That's like recurrent processing in your brain. And when that happens, consciousness appears. The last one is Attention Schema Theory, or AST, by Michael Graziano. AST proposes that consciousness is a model the brain builds of its own attention. Just like we model the world around us, the brain models its internal processes, especially attention. So this model, called by attention schema, helps us keep track of what we are paying attention to, and that's what we experience as consciousness. In short, a very, very, very simple theory. Consciousness is the brain's informative guess about its own focus. This theory links consciousness into internal monitoring, like how we track our body with our body schema, or how we focus on with our attention schema. Now let's look at the consciousness source comparison table. The first one is what? LRT. It is a local recurrent feedback in sensory areas. How it differs from GNWT? GNWT needs global broadcasting across the brain. The second one is the Integrated Information Theory, or IIT. Integration of information that is high-fi value. It differs from GNWT because GNWT focuses on accessibility and broadcasting, not pi. For hot, thought becomes conscious when reflected upon. GNWT does not require metacognition. Fourth one is the recurrent processing theory, or RPT, early local feedback loops. GNWT relies on late-stage global access. And the last one is attention schema theory, or AST, model of one's own attention. So it differs from GNWT because GNWT does not depend on internal models. Now to sum it up, GNWT theory explains how unconscious processes become conscious by broadcasting information widely. It involves widespread brain activation and attention. It stands apart from theories like hot, IT, and local feedback theories. And finally, it is supported by neuroimaging and cognitive studies. Now that is all for our report. Bye.